Hello, I'm Jonathan Bowman-Perks, and welcome to my favorite time of the week. And this week, I'm delighted to have Paul Bean. Paul is the CEO of City FM. It's not a radio station. City FM, UK and Europe. They have three different parts of the business as a global business, but it's facilities management. And Paul was recommended by Mike Still. Mike, who has many contacts and is a very inspiring leader himself. But anyway, Paul, welcome. Great having you on the series.
Thanks, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to spend a bit of time with you. I'm looking forward to the questions.
It's just, well, it's almost like we're going to be in your kitchen having a bit of a chat. And you are, by anybody's account, and I know when we had our first chat, I really felt a really strong connection with you. A great storyteller, but also very authentic. And let's go back to the early days of what shaped you as a leader. You had a tough upbringing with your dad and your mum and your back situation, which gave you quite a lot of drive in life. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a story of some of the things that have shaped you into the leader you are today on the journey, and a few of the jobs you've done more recently until the current CEO of City FM, UK and Europe?
Sure. Yeah, look, I don't think my story is that unique. I grew up in Liverpool. There's a city of hard knocks. I had a father that enjoyed the pub too much, drank a little bit too much, was quite an aggressive character, and I never really made any connection with him. And I think for a young boy growing up, when you're looking for a role model in your life, and the only one you've got is not a role model, then you start looking elsewhere. That's not the character I want to be. So who's more like the character I want to be? And I suppose I took the best bits of all of the figures around me as I grew up, and was solely determined on not being, that the sort of worst version of my father, but the best version I could be. So I think that was a driver for me. I didn't know actually for many years that it was what was behind the drive that I feel I've got, but it was about getting as far away from that as possible, and providing a better role model for my own children.
Yeah. And how did your mum cope?
Oh, look, she had a tough time, but she was brave enough and courageous enough to move away, leave my father when we were, I think I was 16 at the time, and literally moved from Liverpool to Watford. I followed about a year later and went to college there, but it was very disruptive throughout my sort of educational part of my life. It was the worst period in a way. So I sort of left without any real academic standard. I had very basic qualifications, and I faced a lot of negativity from people in the job environment who really wrote me off. I never really got a chance. If you didn't come out of with a strong college education or a good degree, in those days, you were pretty much expected to be a labourer or, go do something more manual, and that was never what I wanted. So yeah, my mum had a tough time, but she was also for me, I guess, an inspiration in the way that you don't have to put up with the life you've got. You can change it. You just have to decide what you want.
Yeah, and for those who are listening who may have equally difficult upbringings and tough backgrounds, what do they do to look for other role models than the limited few they had around them? I mean, I think of my wife, Lee, who grew up from a mother being the only divorcee in a Roman Catholic town. And, they were described as the devil's spawn because of that. Her only role models were the nuns that she met. So she thought she might become a nun. Then she got taught, so she might become a teaching nun. Then she watched The Sound of Music. So she thought she'd be a teaching, singing nun. But then she realized there was more to it than just that. There was a whole world out there when she got to England. But how about you? How did you find other role models?
Look, a lot of them were in sport. I mean, I was a huge fan of Liverpool at the time. Bill Shankly was the manager of Liverpool at the time, a rough, tough Glaswegian, but a real honest guy, a real authentic leader. And I think I was 8 or 9 years old when I went to the town hall to see the club come home with one of the trophies. and his speech just gripped me. I thought, wow, what a character. He just spoke the truth, and he spoke passionately, and his whole focus was, this is for you, the people. It seemed much bigger than a football club. It was a movement.
Wow.
And I think, at that young age, maybe looking up at him on the balcony, it was for me a little bit of, what must it be like to be there?
Really?
To be standing that side.
Yeah. Wow. And here you are as a CEO, and having been CEO of some pretty sizable organizations, inspiring other people. So explain to everybody listening about City FM, the UK and Europe part that you're the CEO of, what it does in facilities management, and the sort of family side to it, and then a couple of the other earlier jobs as well would be interesting.
Sure. Well, and first of all, City FM is an incredible company. It was founded by Willie and Susan Hockey, now Lord and Lady Hockey, and about 35 years ago, and has organically grown from very basic, very sort of rudimentary beginnings as a small refrigeration company to turnover today of 1.2 billion and operating in 7 countries around the world. It's an incredible story. And I think from the moment I met Willie and he told me about the business, I was pretty hooked on City's history and the passion for where it's going. It's more than a family business, it's a community business. Many people have been with the company for many years. I mean, some from the start. And it's a business that doesn't talk about caring for people. It genuinely cares for people. And I don't have time to tell you the amount of things that City do, what Willie does, and the amount of work that he does that's unspoken. But everything has our people at the heart. It's a real focus on the customer and giving great service in facilities, as well as making sure our people are, really equipped and engaged to deliver. So, it's a joy, to be honest, to step into an organization where culturally, I feel we're right on the pulse of what successful organizations, should be doing.
Yeah.
But it's equally challenging, and it's equally humbling. It's a kind of big act to follow, if you like, taking that legacy forward.
Yeah.
But it's something I enjoy, and it's, I love a challenge. I love the challenge of taking what I think is a great business and making it better.
Yeah.
So City, largely we're a food retail support service company, although we're in many markets. I think last count about 7 markets. We provide technical services, maintenance services, and cleaning services to, household names like Marks and Spencer's and Asda and many others, as well as, organizations that sit outside of food retailing, within hospitality and within petrochems and other sectors. Facilities has been a growing and developing market for the last 35 to 40 years in the UK and globally, and it's still a growth space, and it's still quite young. In spite of that time frame, I think the sort of evolution, the move towards using technology, more laterally, the real focus on digitization is transforming what we do and how we do it. And it's bringing a richness to customers' environments, especially in data, that they've never had before.
Yeah.
So, we are doing some incredible things on energy management. We're doing some pretty incredible things on asset management. And I guess the great thing is we feel we're just at the start of that journey.
Yeah, and I do love in the conversation we had before you saying, if I may share your 4 priorities. Do you want to just briefly say what those top 4 were? I found that very inspiring.
Yeah, so we spent quite a bit of time earlier this year sort of working out what the next phase should look like, and recognize that we need to do a lot more work on diversity. I think we do have a very diverse workforce, but it's been organically, sort of grown that way. So we've got a working party on that at the moment, really looking at how do we create an environment that is, truly inspiring for people, regardless of their background or their particular the word I'm looking for. Their cultural differences, let's say. So there's a lot going on there, and I think we have made a lot of progress, but I think we can do a lot more.
Yeah.
I guess environmentally, we recognize that there's a lot of things that we do environmentally in the space we're in that is kind of, we're doing it without a real structured plan. So, it's now focusing on how can we do our part, play our role in supporting society to create a much better place for our children in the future, and what role can we play in minimizing harm to the environment and maximizing the positive transition, let's say, towards more effective methods of working that don't do damage to our environment or to the world around us. So those are two big focuses. Growth is another one. It's interesting because just talking this through with some of the senior leaders in our business, we've never been a growth hungry business, and we're not really growth hungry today. It's that progress is growth, and certainly for us, we're keen to diversify into other markets. We think we've got solutions for other markets that will add a lot of value. So it's not any growth. We're very much focused on where can we add value to customers, and working with customers that are like us, that understand the journey we're on and have the same value system that we have. And largely that centers around what we call the city partnership model, which is a truly transparent way of working. And I think there's much said about partnership in industry, but the city model is about as bare as you'll ever come across. I was chatting to someone about this recently and said, it is literally, if you want to see how much it costs us to change a tire on a vehicle, we'll provide you with that information. It's about creating a relationship with our customers that is built on trust. And is there for the long term, not for the short haul. So,
yeah, that's very good. So the four ones: digitalization, growth, diversity, inclusion, and ESG. Very powerful.
Yeah.
And then just give us 3 or 4 of the different companies before CDFM, UK and Europe that you worked for, just to give us a bit of a flavor of the ones before that led to this role you're doing now.
Yeah, look, I suppose in the FM space, because I spent 20 years in the hospitality space before coming into FM, my first exposure was with Compass Group. I led a managed service business for them back in 2003, which was very successful. And then I had a foray into my own business. I did a management buy-in with a colleague, and built a company up to employ 10,000 plus people and turnover close to 150 million. After I lost that business back in 2010, which was really as the result of the global financial crisis, I then moved into working for Amey in the UK, which everyone would know as a roads and highways predominantly in their FM space. Before I took a complete sort of switch in direction and joined Sodexo in Australia, and went to work in the mining or energy and resource space, which I did because I hadn't done it before. I did because it was probably one of the only markets I hadn't spent any time in, and I did for the adventure. And I spent 6 years with Sodexo, culminating in me running the global mining business.
Did you have the adventures that you wanted?
I did. I have traveled to some of the most extraordinary places in the world.
Can you give us one that stood out in your mind?
Well, probably one was there's a place in Chile called I might have the countries mixed up now. Is it Chile or Peru? Let me think. I think it was Chile, and it's a place called Santa Elena in Calama, and it's a mine that dates back to the turn of the 19th century, and was back in the day producing cordite and is now in the lithium space. But going there was an extraordinary adventure in itself. But what really sort of I'm very passionate about history. So one of the things that gripped me while I was there was I got introduced to this particular company, their sort of what they call their VIP accommodation center, and it was like a sort of colonial hacienda that had been built in the sort of 1920s. And what was fascinating to me was, okay, that was interesting enough, but it had been kept exactly as it was. It had the old telephony system, had everything, old gramophones were in there, and that was fascinating. And then I got introduced to the visitors book, and I opened and flicked a few pages, and straight away saw Pinochet's signature, and saw a few other notorious leaders, let's say, signatures, as well as dignitaries from many other countries. And I challenged the guy that was showing around and said, why on earth would these guys be coming here? And he said, oh, well. And then he told me the whole sort of history of munitions and how this place had been used to broker big deals for providing the core, if you like, components for munitions development. So yeah, I things like, I mean, I just think, well, I would never have got that opportunity if I wasn't in the mining industry, as well as many experiences of just the fantastic people and the sort of way of working in remote spaces, and the huge sacrifice I think some people give to earn a living, which people generally cannot comprehend.
Yeah.
Spending weeks and weeks at a time away, which, as you would know from the military, away from their families, living with their colleagues, and working 12 hours a day, and it's just very humbling to be around those sorts of people and to talk about their experiences.
Yeah. Well, it fits, Paul, with Matt Oppenheimer, who is on the series. And Matt is the CEO of Remitly. And Remitly have created an app that allows people who are working away from home, immigrants, to send money back home.
Yeah.
As simply and at lowest margin as possible to their own families, because they're working hard for months away, for years sometimes, away from their families, to make a living for their families back home in any country you care to imagine, from Indonesia to the Philippines to wherever it is, to India.
Yeah.
So I think that's fantastic. And then perhaps stepping back to the young Liverpool lad who was growing up in a tough environment, not knowing what the future held. Now, with the wisdom of all those years, lots of battle scars, and you either succeed or you gain some experience, as Mandela would say, and you've had both. What bit of advice and wisdom would you give to your young self starting out that might be useful to other people?
Well, I mean, how useful, I don't know, but for me, it definitely would have been, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, Paul. I was in a rush to get everywhere as a young guy growing up. And I think just to take your time to listen and learn, and not being in quite as big a hurry to sort of climb the social ladder and, I guess get some sense of self-esteem that I think I was looking for as a young kid starting out.
Yeah.
I think it's funny when you look back, because I think, what was I doing? I was really trying to find my own value in society. What was it all about? I didn't want to be just an anything. I wanted to be someone. And now today, if I was coaching somebody who had that same sort of outlook, if you like, I'd be saying, you already are someone. Yeah. You just need to take your time. It's not a rush.
Yeah, you do a great bit of wisdom, and you remind me of the carving on the side of a religious bishop, I think from a couple of 100 years ago, and the carving said, when I was a young man, I wanted to change the world, and then when I got older, I thought I could change my country, and when I got older still, I thought I could change my town, and older still, I thought I could change my friends and my family, and here I am on my deathbed, and I realized that if I just changed myself and worked on how I showed up and being me and the best version I can, then perhaps I might influence my friends, which would influence my town, my country, and who knows, the world. And I think that's very, wise bit of advice. Let's go on. Go on, sorry, you
Sorry,
were
I
going
was
to say.
just going to add, I think, the underlying part of all of that for me was, just to be nice. You know, I think in that rush, we used to talk, I think in the 80s, it was a big thing, wasn't it, about this sort of cutthroat mentality of business, and people were very disposable. It's funny in a world where we're often talking about things that are wrong, but I think it's becoming a nicer place to live.
Yeah.
People are nicer to each other. I think that's a big, a big development over the last 25, 30 years.
Yeah. And you've been in the hospitality industry for 20 years, and now here you are in facilities management with people doing long, arduous roles. And we saw with the applause that was given to the NHS and people who are delivering and servicing and helping us, that there's a very good book called Head, Hand and Heart, which it's saying that for the last, in those 70s and 80s, everybody's going, it's just IQ, clever people were given the ascendancy, and that was the thing everybody wanted. But we've now seen that the hands, getting on and doing the job, and the heart, the caring side of things, hospitality and nursing and things like that, and I'm in the caring profession myself, is actually starting to get recognized as being important and valued, and a form of intelligence that we need to measure, reward, and recognize. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. I think I was a bit of a guinea pig as a young manager, and was thrust into a Savile and Holdsworth assessment, and I was a guinea pig, literally. There were 25 graduates and me. I had no idea at the time that the purpose of me being there literally was a test. But the organization that put me through that back then was really testing this whole theory of EQ over IQ. And it was interesting because I fared very well in the process, a week-long assessment center. And at the time, I put it down to I had more work experience than the graduates, and that was probably the thing that made the difference. But I think looking back, it actually was that I had that experience. What it gave me was a more EQ than the people around me. And who would know that years later, this becomes the very skill we should be more focused on.
Yeah.
And like many people, I've spent my whole working life trying to improve my academic quality, if you like, and not necessarily through chasing academic qualification, but by being hungry to learn.
Yeah. Well, I've deliberately put the background on there, that what you're talking about is EQ, which accounts for 30% of people's success in business and their performance in the job, whereas IQ, which was given so much status, when we did the research with Dr. Reuven Bar-On, who designed the work on EQ, IQ accounts for 6%. Still important, but it's only 6% versus 30%. And then what's the missing 64? And that's where things like people's integrity, the MQ, their morals quotient, their sense of meaning and purpose, the legacy that they leave behind, leaving it better than they found it. Their, as we're going to talk about later, their health and mental and physical health and well-being, their resilience. You've shown amazing tenacity and resilience, and adapting when you pick yourself back up, having failed for various reasons. And then the brand, the reputation, the image, and the impact, what people say about Paul when you're not in the room. So does that resonate for you?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I guess when you're in your younger days, I mean, maybe it's changing, I don't know, but, I was a very introspective person. I was always self-analyzing how I thought I was doing without any measurement. What's the metric that you use? These days, we become a bit more adept at running things like 360 feedback sessions and so on. And I think that they do have a place in helping you have a perception of what others think, but they're still a little bit manufactured in that. I think, for people to be truly honest and truly open, you've got to create an environment first. And I think that now, I mean, I'm certainly more focused on, can I create an environment where people genuinely feel safe and comfortable in providing feedback that will help me.
Yeah.
So, stepping away from what's seen as criticism and being able to say, well, Paul, if you did a bit more of this, it would get this out of me. Or, when you say something like that, I feel like this. It's that whole dynamic of, if it's a friend, you have those conversations.
Yeah.
They're not framed in that way, but, their friends will coach you on the areas that I think that they see you, let's say, needing help on.
Yeah.
And you mentioned Mike Still earlier, and Mike is brilliant at this. I've known Mike for 20 odd years. One of the reasons I think we get on so well is that Mike's always very honest.
Yes.
And he's nice with it. He's not, not hurtful, but he'll say to me, well, hang on a minute, Paul, that's just you,
Yeah.
It's really.
But I think, Paul, you and Mike are quite remarkable, the pair of you. And I've had some very powerful conversations with people over the years. But a couple of the most powerful ones have been with you and Mike individually. And after each one, I came out reeling from it going, wow, now that was a conversation. That was like raw, authentic, real. Whereas sometimes you find people are guarding, they're hanging back something. And that great question, what have you not told me yet? And like with you, there was hardly anything. We were just both being very open. And that was another thing which stuck with me. Proudest and darkest moments of your life. That was quite powerful, because you were in your proudest moment, you were in hospitality for many years. Tell us about a proud moment from your hospitality days.
Yeah, it's interesting that this because I think I hear a lot these days, particularly from female leaders, talking about imposter syndrome, and it's not a unique issue for women. I think as I was growing up in business, I felt that way. I never quite felt that I belonged, particularly in hospitality. I hadn't gone to hotel school. I didn't have a degree. I'd sort of worked my way up from the ground. And, these were all my issues, by the way, no one else's. And I think when Hilton recognized me as I was the newcomer young general manager of the year, in my first real general management appointed role, it was hugely rewarding for me, because it kind of reinforced for me that I was doing the right thing. It was, I think you're doing what you think is right. You don't know if you're doing the right thing. So when it gets the results, and if I look back to that year particularly, and the team I had around me, the authenticity that you speak of, it was just me being honest, and that honesty is about being able to say, do you know what, I don't know. I think we need help. Or to be, saying to somebody, it's not going to work. Things need to change. It's sometimes you can be too honest, and when you're willing to sort of tear off the mask and be authentic, if you like, that makes you vulnerable.
Yeah, and you touched on something which is very interesting, this whole area of imposter syndrome, fascinated by it. And also you've alluded to, you create psychological safety. That's why we had such a great conversation, where in a psychologically safe environment, it's okay to be vulnerable, and only the strong can be vulnerable. And those who can't be have got a lot of stuff they're hanging on to. And with imposter syndrome and some of the things we think about ourselves, there's some lovely work from Nancy Klein with a K, K-L-I-N-E. And she wrote the book, Time to Think, and her latest book's just coming out, which I'm going to be listening to, about the promise that you won't interrupt people. I've forgotten the exact title of it, but it's just coming out at the end of this month. It's a definite listen to. I'm a dyslexic, so I tend to listen to books. But in it, Nancy talks about assumptions, and what is a long, wordy way of saying it's an untrue, limiting assumption that you're living as if it's true. So it's not true, but you believe it. Like, I'm not good enough, and this happens with our children. I remember my daughter, Harriet O'Brien, I can't remember which it was, when they were about 8 and they were at school, and they said, "Daddy, I can't do this." And now that was an untrue, limiting assumption that she thought she couldn't do it. So what you do is you replace it with a positive alternative assumption. It's also an assumption, but it's a positive alternative one. So I said, okay, and if you could do it, a bit of homework she was doing. How would you do it? She said, "Oh, I'll do it this way, Daddy." And she just went and finished it off. And I went, "Wow, well done." And you need those positive alternative assumptions, because we often hold ourselves back and we believe we're not good enough and that the people will find us out. And it is disappointing to me occasionally when I'm finding female CEOs hold back from coming on a series like this of Inspiring Leadership. They say, "Oh, I want to keep a low profile. I'm not quite ready yet." Well, like, we're never ready. But blokes, they blag it and they go, "Yeah, I've got about 50%. I'll have a go." And you can't generalize because everybody's different. But time and again, it's the theme that people will see themselves as an imposter or hold back when it's an assumption, and give it a go.
Yeah, look, there's two things that really resonate with me in what you just said. The first is that I'm a serial interrupter, and if I think back my younger days, that urgency to get your point across is to not recognize, and it's back to EQ again, in a way, it's not recognizing the impact that has on others. And I have to work constantly at that. I've got this sort of urge to. It's for me, it's not interruption. For me, it's almost collaborating in the discussion, but it does get taken in different ways from different people.
Stay with that for a moment, because I'm going to join in. My wife's family are from Bundoora and Donegal, and so you have conversations there in a room with about 50 people. Everybody's talking, no one's listening. They're all adding to the story and building on it. But I found the work of Oscar Trimboli, who's a friend of mine and a coach. He's teaching me about listening skills, that 50% of your day is listening, but only 2% of us have been trained in listening. And that he talks about the 5 levels of listening. You're listening to yourself, firstly, clearing all the clutter, the imposter syndrome, the assumptions, and that the thought that I need to add value. If I'm quiet, I'm not adding value. Shut the F up and listen. That adds great value. So one is listening to yourself. The second one, listening to their content. The third, listening to the context. The fourth, which is the great one, is listening to the unsaid. What have you not yet said? And the final one is listening for the meaning of what it is. And when you get a thoroughly good listening to, it is far more powerful than someone trying to one up your story with a better story that they have. And that's something I'm constantly working on myself. I mean, running an interview series like this, I've got to be careful I don't make it too much about me, but you've got me going, so I'll shut up and let you talk.
It's funny you say that, because I had a client say to me yesterday, following a meeting, "You were very quiet." And I said I was listening intently, but it's kind of measure of expectation, because my natural nature is to be right in the heart of the discussion. But sometimes it is an absolutely conscious decision I'm not going to say anything, I'm just going to listen. And 20 years ago, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have been aware enough to have done that. So you're absolutely right. And I think when you do have that sort of sense to, pick your moment and think, well, no, in this particular environment, I'm just going to listen to what's happening here and what people got to say. It is incredible what you pick up, because back to your Donegal story, and I'm from that sort of culture where it is a bit of a bun fight when you get together with your family, and everyone pitching for their opportunity to say what they've got to say. It means everyone speaks. So when that happens, there are things that get lost, and in business, those things can be really important. So I think when you become a leader, part of leadership, and it's not necessarily being the leader of the business, a leader in any level, you've got to have that awareness to know when to be quiet and listen, and when to speak and lead. And I think there is an order. I don't think you can speak and lead until you've listened.
Yeah. One of the leaders on an early series talked about how important it was for him to sit in the back seat of the car and let his other junior leaders to drive. And then when there's a real crisis, perhaps he slips into the front seat and helps. But really, the greatest leader, Sun Tzu said, the greatest leader, the people said, we did it ourselves. You had some high moments like that, Hilton Hotels being the youngest general manager of the year. You also talked about a really tough time. a dark part of your life and what you learned from it. So just tell us a bit about, I think you were talking about Resource Group and losing that, and what you learned from such a tough time in the middle of the global financial crash, which brought your business down with it.
Yeah, so we, so it was myself and a gentleman called Terry Brannigan, architected a buy-in of a company in Northern Ireland. And we had this vision to create a competitor in the FM space. And I guess to take everything that we felt had made us successful within the Compass business into a private enterprise. And we had a buy and build strategy. So it was, unashamedly about gearing up the company and acquiring organizations that, we could bring value collectively together into a single entity. And so it was buying small businesses and building a single brand. And we did a lot of great things in that company. And their first 2 or 3 years, the momentum was very strong. The global collapse was the sort of final nail in the coffin, I would say, looking back. I don't think it was the root cause of the challenge we faced in losing the company. I think the biggest problem in the company was us. And I think we weren't as prepared for the journey as we could have been. It goes back to the sprint and the marathon again. We were in a sprint and we should have been in a marathon. And I think had we been a bit more measured and taken a bit more time, the business would have succeeded. So that rush to grow, that rush to be bigger, that rush to, bring more shareholder value, and, have that sort of capitalist shareholder focus was our destruction. And I think looking back, for me, although the global collapse of the banks was the catalyst, because the drying up of funds in a business that's already highly geared in a market that's contracting, and everybody was super cautious at that time. It just put the pressure on us that I guess we needed to tip over. So losing control of the company, then losing the company, was a very dark period in my career. And I didn't realize, because to be honest, after leaving Resource, I spent 12 months trying to recover Resource, and I've never worked harder. And Mike still was alongside me through that, and he said to me himself, Paul, for a year out, I've never seen you work so hard. So I never really stopped. And it probably, again, wasn't until 4, 5, maybe 6 years after that someone asked me a question and I reflected. And actually, the first time I told the story, I was shocked at how emotional I was about it. I was choked and couldn't really tell the story. So, I think looking back, there were many learnings from business and many learnings on people. And, there were good and bad in many different situations. But the biggest learning was for me personally, and it was all about choices you make.
Yeah. And also you allude to something which is quite close to my heart. So a friend of mine, Oliver Johnson, has designed a program, Stepping Out, from the top team, helping people who are running businesses to have a succession and then plan their own, what they're going to do next. Because often it just comes as a brutal sort of ending and it doesn't end well. But so there's a way of coaching people through that every year, which is very powerful, works well. But his point was, from all the leaders he's worked with, that many get very attached to their identity being the CEO of that business or the founder of it. And so stepping away from it, it's almost like losing part of who you are. And so you can get too deeply embroiled in it. And it's a very wrenching emotional experience and needing almost, therapy and help to do that. Does that resonate in any way?
Yeah, look, it's a long story and too much for this short call, but definitely I went through that period really without knowing where the support could be, and definitely feeling personally, a deep sense of loss.
Yeah.
And it's not as important as life and death. but it's probably next along the line is, the things that you're passionate about and the things that you put. I put everything into the 3 years or 4 years in the end that I had with the company, almost a breaking point.
Yeah. And we've talked, you and I, about family and your wife and your children. How have you got back that time of paying back to them? Because of course, when a CEO or any leader gives their heart, body and soul to their business, the family normally suffers. What's been your learning about that, and how have you rebalanced things?
Well, I certainly from my first marriage never survived, and I wouldn't say that was down to the business. It was certainly down to me, but I think my children, my relationship with them has never been stronger. I think I'm far more able to coach them through their own challenges. Now they're much more grown up. They're in the late 20s. And they were largely oblivious to what was going on. I wasn't going home and talking to them about my challenges and my concerns. Perhaps I should have been. But today we don't really talk about it. It was just a period in my business career. It wasn't something to define my personal life.
Yeah, but it does stay with us, and hopefully we learn from it. We were talking about, obviously the theme is inspiring leadership. You had a couple of people that you saw as inspiring leaders who you'd like to hear them share their stories on this series. Denis and Paz, do you want to just talk about them and why you found them and found them still inspiring leaders and the qualities that they bring that others could learn from?
Yeah, look, the first was Denis Mashwell, who's currently the CEO of Sodexo worldwide. And I met Denis about 6 months before he took on that role, when he was gearing up to taking on the role. And I spent 3 days with him touring my business and showing him what we were doing, orientating him into the mining space. And I just thoroughly enjoyed the time with him. He was so down to earth, so authentic, really engaging. He was different to other leaders at that level that I'd met. There was nothing remote or aloof about him. He really wanted to help. He really wanted to be part of helping the business succeed. And then he went on to lead the business, and in a way that I thought was in itself really authentic, really inspiring, really engaging. He was always putting himself out front. I just thought that he, if there was somebody I'd kind of like to be like in my leadership style, it would be Denis. I liked what he was doing, and I still like what he does. I think the way he engages with the business is fabulous.
Fantastic. What about, thank you for that. And what about Paz? What qualities does she have that you think are admirable and make her an inspiring leader?
Paz is great. She's just a fabulous human being. She's one of those rare people you meet that you think she doesn't know how good she is. That was my impression of her. She's a woman that grew up in Chile, dealt with the challenge of being in a very religious country, with all of the sort of, let's say, the barriers that you can face in being different in that sort of environment. She married a partner in Australia. She settled in Australia. She has 2 children. And I hope she doesn't forgive me for saying too much about her personal life, but Paz, from the moment I met her, just had a spark, I think, that connected with people, and everybody liked her. She was one of those people that could shake things up without shaking people up. She could get people moving in the right direction. She's just one of those people. I think Paz will go on to do whatever Paz wants to do, and she will succeed at it. And for all the reasons that I think people are successful, plus, I look at her and think, wow, she's so together in her outlook. She's up for a challenge. She's very humble. She connects with people at all levels. She's very clever. She's an engineer. That was her background, but she never exercised engineering capability. She went into human resource, and I put her into a role that really stretched her in pushing the boundaries of innovation and helping the business to, be really forward thinking. And I'd say, I didn't give a huge direction on it, but she just knew how to tackle it, and she went about it in the right way. And she made the job a success because of who she is. And now she's a general manager of that business in Australia. And, I'll do my best to keep in touch and see how her career progresses. But, I know it will be onwards, upwards, and very successful.
Fantastic. Well, Paul, we could chat so much, but I'm conscious of your time. So let me just hone it down to your thoughts about, and COVID's such a big thing. We've talked about the topic frequently on the series. What do you think your prediction of the way we're going to live and work and how leaders are going to lead in the kind of office environment we've got of the future? What's your prediction of how it's going to be in the next few years? I mean, who knows? But I'm interested in your viewpoint.
Yeah, look, it's really tough. We're still in a really dynamic environment. This pandemic is far from over. I think in cities terms, we're quite fortunate to be in really essential services. And the impact and effect on our company has been far less than many of our competitors. I think the one thing that's very clear, and I don't think comes as a great shock to many, is that the acceleration in digitization, the acceleration in the use of technology in, doing what we're doing today and connecting in the way we are, becoming much more of a norm. I think that it is just going to, it is another sort of revolution, if you like. This sort of technology revolution that we've been talking about has just kicked into gear. It's been brewing, and I think the catalyst for this has really been COVID and the pandemic. And I think if you're in the technology space today, I certainly can't think of a technology company that I haven't been connected to that has not seen huge growth in the last 6 months. So probably the biggest change we're going to see is where that lands and how that shapes the behaviors of organizations post-COVID. Do we carry on working in this way? Do we use less office space? Or do we just use the space we've got in a very different way? And I think the other element, and you touched it earlier on in our conversation about how everyone came out to clap for the NHS and just being nice. I think one of the things that will come out of COVID is more genuine care for each other, more genuine understanding of, what we're dealing with. The mental health challenges I think that people are facing through this are as yet unknown. And we're seeing it in small ways with our own people. We have touchdowns and connecting. We have our people connected in many different ways because they're very remotely dispersed today. And it's really challenging us to think differently about how we check in on health, on mental health and well-being, and how we adapt. Not everybody's got the fortune to have a space to work at home.
Yeah.
So how do organizations help employees that don't have, a perfect home environment? I think if I had a crystal ball, Jonathan, I would be doing it today and manufacturing that environment that's suited to our people post-COVID. But certainly for me, it seems to be around technology, behaviors and the way we work, and genuine care and consideration for each other.
Yeah, very wise. So let's go for the last two areas that we've chatted about before, you and I. Firstly, what would you like your personal legacy and your business legacy to be? And then finally, your thought on a book that you'd like to mention. I think you're going to mention someone who's going to be on the series, but tell me your thoughts on that, your legacy and a book you'd recommend.
Yeah, it's interesting because the first discussion Willie and I had was about legacy. And when I talked about why I would have left Sodexo and joined City, it was all about, towards the end of my working career, being able to look back on something and say, yes, I made a difference. So I think, my legacy is about making sure that the current City legacy is there in 10 years' time. and is continued to grow and prosper. And that all of the values that we have today as an organization are still lived 10 years from now. I think that would be really satisfying to have been part of that, and to, you know, be seen to have been part of the team that continued to lead in the way that this organization was built.
That's great. Yeah. And then
on books, I think I said to you, I'm a bit of a book butterfly. I have literally hundreds of books, and I read, reread, and then, you know, and reconnect with them different times. But the one that always stands out for me, there's two books actually, but both on the same theme, were Kevin Roberts' books. He was, I don't know if he still is CEO of Saatchi's actually, but he was CEO of Saatchi's when they were written. And there were Love Marks and the Love Marks Effect, which absolutely struck a chord with me. If there was two books I wish I'd written, that's those. Those are the two books. I thought the sentiment of what he had to say, I think the message he gave business about, you know, beyond the brand, beyond the clever marketing, the sort of need for true, authentic values to be lived and breathed by organizations. And we're seeing it all the time now, you know, where brands are being destroyed by poor decisions around how they procure their goods, or their, you know, approach to rewarding their people. And the world's becoming smaller as a result of technology. So maybe 50 years ago, you could get away with a clever marketing message that actually was untrue behind the scenes, and you got people believing in it. Today, you better live by the statements you make, because you will be found out. Yeah. And I think that, you know, going back to the City legacy, as an organization, that needs to be our aspiration. It is our aspiration to have a business and a brand that's recognized as truly authentic and caring about our people, about the environment, about our customers, and not being, you know, driven by the sort of greed for growth and the bottom line, but about making the right decisions and doing the right things, and putting our people at the heart of those decisions rather than profit. I'm really lucky to work for an organization that truly does personify that. Yeah. And I absolutely accept and acknowledge that I am lucky to be where I am.
Yeah. Well, Paul Bean, CEO of City FM, UK and Europe, it's been an absolute pleasure being with you. I really admire you as a leader and your authenticity and your humble vulnerability, but yet with it comes a lot of courage and a lot of drive. And it's been a real pleasure having you on the series. Thank you, Paul.
It's a pleasure, Jonathan, and thank you for those very kind words. And yeah, okay, I really enjoyed talking to you. Great to catch up.
Thank you.